Suffice it to say that it has been an eventful April, and now we're sitting here on the second day of May as I'm recording this, taking a little bit of a look back on the past month and seeing really what's all been going on in the world of agriculture here in the United States, particularly in our neck of the woods in north central Kansas. Obviously, we know about all the different events and things that have been going on whenever it comes to the geopolitical ramifications of the agricultural economy through all sorts of policies that have been enacted over the course of the past month and where that's been taking us kind of on a little bit of a roller coaster ride. But really, whenever it comes to the domestic front and the production sphere, this has been a relatively uneventful April and probably in one of the best ways possible. We've had some nice timely rains, not too much, probably need a little bit more, but we're still on track for a lot of our key metrics determining what the domestic production in Kansas and in the United States is going to be. So all in all, not looking too bad for us on the production side. And we'll go over a couple of those metrics and measurements that tell us some of that information today. But today we're going to be talking about a little bit different angle. Amidst all the different things that are going on the policy side, we're going to try to nail down some of the particulars of the policy that a lot of farmers have been talking about since December, and that is the ECAP program, part of a measure passed by Congress back in the winter to send out some payments to farmers on a per acre basis of what they've planted. And we'll go through the details of how that's all going to work today. I'm Luke Byers, and you are listening to Gab in the Cab. Before we begin, I kind of want to start by doing things a little bit differently on today's episode, just kind of looking in review at where we're at in the domestic production sphere whenever it comes to Kansas crops. So every week, as many know, the U.S. Department of Agriculture releases crop progress reports, and this just kind of gives us some ongoing metrics of how the process of planting and harvesting and everything in between goes throughout the year so that we can kind of look on a national and a statewide level just to see where we stack up compared to previous years and kind of what are some of the key indicators that can provide us information looking forward about kind of a rough outlook of how things might go down the line. So, for example, corn planting progress in Kansas as of the final week of April was at 39% completed. So what we mean by that, whenever we're interpreting this, is of the projected acres that are anticipated to go to corn this year, 39% of those acres have been planted according to the surveyed population that this survey goes out to. That's above the 29% on average as of the last week of April. Likewise, whenever it comes to soybeans, the report is that we're 13% planted on soybeans as of the last week of April, which is above the 7% on average. And we look at a couple of other areas here, grain sorghum, milo, 3% planted above 1% on average, which really isn't that strong of an indicator. And then winter wheat, whenever we're looking at crop progress on there, heading in Kansas is at 19%, which is above the 10% on average for the last week of April. However, we're behind where we were last year. At this time of year last year, we were at 29% headed out. So some of that might actually be good news because we're getting adequate levels of moisture so that we're not accelerating the growth stages of winter wheat here in Kansas. And that's reflected in the condition measures of winter wheat in Kansas as well. Right now, we're sitting at 36% fair, 40% good, and 7% excellent. So we're at 47% good to excellent, which is kind of those are the brackets that you want to be at to give yourself a good picture of what you can expect. So we're right around that half of it's good to excellent and half of it's fair or below. So really, relative to the past 4 or 5 years, we're in decent shape. The last measure that I want to touch on here from the report is topsoil and subsoil moisture conditions. So in Kansas, as of this past week, we're looking at 59% adequate and 11% surplus in topsoil. So that would be the top 4 inches of your soil profile there. So that's 70%. So we're looking pretty good on topsoil moisture. Again, probably owable to some of those timely rains. Not quite as optimistic on the subsoil moisture, but still a lot better than previous years at this time. 54% adequate, 6% surplus, which means that we're only 40% in the short or very short categories and 60% in the adequate or surplus category. So we're in pretty good shape for this time of year coming into May. We really haven't had any big stinkers whenever it comes to heat waves or anything like that. We've had a couple warm days here and a couple cool days, but really we've been kind of nicely fitting into this channel of relatively ideal weather to get our crops moving along. Whenever it comes to the spring planted, then also get movement along in the growth stages and the biomass and the heading out of our winter wheat. So those are some positive things to report on the side of things whenever it comes to Kansas's domestic production. Obviously, we're not asking one to take a USDA report as gospel truth. Really, what this is telling us, though, is not necessarily an accurate description of what's really going on out there, but really it's an indicator of how things like our grain commodity markets are going to respond to certain information and really giving us just a broader picture of what kinds of domestic production outlook we could anticipate down the road. Obviously, things like this can drop at the pin of a hat, and if you ever watch commodity markets, you know exactly how that feels. So, like I mentioned at the top, the main subject that I was wanting to talk about today was this new Emergency Commodity Assistance Program, otherwise known as ECAP. And from the period of November 24 to April 25, this has kind of been the keystone thing that's new with the USDA's Farm Service Agency. And I know we're all involved in the FSA and we have a love hate relationship with them because they want all of our information and paperwork and stuff like that. But they also give us some sweet, sweet mammon, if you know what I mean. But whenever I've been talking to farmers over the winter, a lot of them have brought up this program, just asking some kind of basic questions about what it is, how it's going to roll out, and what we can expect from the program. And rumors have gone around saying, oh, if you have corn acres or sorghum acres, you're going to be getting $43 an acre, and soybeans and wheat, you're going to be getting $30 an acre, et cetera, et cetera. And to make a long story short, yeah, that's basically the size of it. But unfortunately, of course, it's not always that simple to get from a point of Congress passing this emergency legislation and the dollars showing up in your bank account. And so I'm going to talk through a little bit of that process today. So as we know, the ECAP program was passed into law by Congress in December, and basically offers payouts to farmers based off of crops that they had planted in the 2024 crop year. And here is a list of parameters that the FSA is requiring in order for those commodity payments to be made to farmers. And here's a list. It's just 4 short bullet points. Number one, be actively engaged in farming. If you are registered with the FSA, I think that covers that. Number two, have an interest in input expenses for a covered commodity. So this could be simply if you had a share lease, for example, that was split 50-50 and you covered 50% of the input expenses, then you're eligible for these payments. So that's kind of what that language is referring to. Number three, have reported acreage of eligible commodities to FSA for the 2024 crop year planted and prevent plant acres to FSA on an FSA 578 report of acreage form. Okay, so that's a lot of mumbo jumbo that I just told you, but basically what it's saying is in order to be eligible for these payments, you have to report your both your planted acres and your prevent plant acres to your FSA office so that they can verify and then give you the payments according to those acres. And that follows into number four, have reported acres that were prevented from being planted to FSA for the 2024 crop year on a CCC 576 notice of loss form. So this is kind of the situation where you got two main forms that you got to fill out at the FSA office. And it could be as simple as going into your FSA office and saying, I need to fill out these two forms so that I'm eligible for the ECAP program. And that's Form FSA 578, Report of Acreage, whenever you're going in to be eligible for FSA programs, filling out the form that says these are the acres that I planted to what crops, and that's going to match up with the satellite imagery that they have of the particular tracts that either you own or that you operate. Likewise, that CCC 576 notice of loss form, that's basically the form that you fill out to say these are the acres that I intended to plant to such and such crop. However, because of weather circumstances, I was unable to plant it to that crop, so that you will be eligible for payments against those acres as well. Registration for this program began on March 19th. So this is something that's actively going on. You can go into your FSA office now and sit down and schedule a time to get this paperwork done and filed so that you can get your payments received. But you have to do it by August 15th, 2025. Otherwise, you're not eligible for it. So make sure that you get those papers submitted so that you can get those payments. I'll also do a brief rundown of some of the crops that are eligible for payments. As another caveat, something to remember is that this is going to be based off of your 2024 planted and prevent plant acres, not your base acres like we see in Title I commodity programs. That's because this is an emergency payment, whereas your Title I programs, that is a standing program as a part of the 2018 Farm Bill. So obviously we got our big four commodities here in Kansas: corn, soybeans, winter wheat, and grain sorghum or milo. So if we go down the list of different commodities that are eligible for the ECAP program, corn is going to be distributed at a rate of $42.91 an acre. Further down, soybeans looking at $29.76 an acre. Sorghum, $42.52 an acre, and wheat, $30.69 an acre. And there's a handy little chart that you can look at on USDA's website. Simply going to, typing into your web browser ECAP calculator tool online, and it should bring it up right away as one of the first options in your web browser. But basically what it does is all you have to do is put in the acres that you had for eligible acres, basically the acres that you planted to each crop, put that in one column, and then you put your acres of prevent plant in another column, and then it'll calculate your eligible acres for each commodity, multiply it by the payment rate, and then add up all those payments. So, but there's a couple of asterisks, caveats, disclaimers associated with the program, because it's not a simple one-to-one relationship between the payment rate and the eligible acres. So what I mean by that is if you had prevent plant acres, you don't get the full payment rate on that. You get half the payment rate. So for example, if I had 1,000 acres of milo that I had intended to plant that got prevent planted, instead of getting $42.52 an acre against them, I would get $21.26 an acre for them. So that's all calculated, put it all together, a combination of 100% of your eligible planted acres and 50% of your eligible prevent plant acres. The other thing to keep in mind is that whenever it comes to the actual payment amount on a per commodity basis, that is only going to be 85% of the payment rate. So say you had 1,000 acres of corn that you planted, 500 acres of prevent plant, at the rate of $42.91. Multiply that all together, that total payment, you multiply that by 85%, and that's how much you're actually going to get paid per commodity. So I'm actually going to run through that exact same example, but with the numbers this time. So if we had 1,000 acres of corn that we planted, we're going to be looking at $42,910, right? If we have 500 acres of prevent plant, so that'd be 500 times 4291 times 50% is $10,727.50. Add that together with the $42,910 and we come up with $53,637.50. But that's not the payment that you'll receive. You will receive 85% of that. So we multiply that by 85%, and we get $45,591.88. So that is going to be the actual payment that gets transferred to you through the ECAP program. So that's just kind of an example to see how this whole thing works. But remember, none of this goes through unless you report your planted acres and your prevent plant acres to your local FSA office. That's how they're going to be able to administer this. There are other restrictions on the program, particularly the maximum payment limit that anyone can get is $125,000. There's an exception to that as well. So you can get above $125,000 total if you have on file what's called a CCC 943 form. So through the Commodity Credit Corporation, basically a form that's verifying that at least 75% of your average gross income is from farming or ranching. So if your income, 75% of that comes from farming or ranching, or more than 75% of that, and you'd be eligible to file that special form, and then you'd be able to get a maximum payment limit of $250,000. So obviously we're talking astronomical levels of payouts in a single year, on top of things like crop insurance indemnities, Title I commodity programs, and other forms of things like livestock and forage insurance, all that sort of stuff. So it's important to make sure that we know exactly where we fall in those particular parameters, what our limits are, so that not only can we capitalize on this program that's being made available against the 2024 crop year, but that we can also utilize that to make some future planning decisions whenever it comes to the financial future of our operations. One thing that I would like to recommend, and obviously take my advice with a grain of salt, but this is just my experience in the agricultural economics world. Whenever you have these one-time ad hoc payments that are starting to become par for the course in the ag policy world, one thing that I would suggest is don't use the funds that you receive as a part of these ad hoc programs like ECAP as part of subsidizing your operating expenses. My recommendation is that you use it to throw things at fixed expenses, things like land payments, mortgage, equipment payments, or capital leases, or things like depreciation. Basically, using the funds that you get from ECAP programs, if you're able to, towards your overhead, your fixed costs, rather than on your variable costs like seed, fertilizer, chemicals, etc. Basically what it comes down to from an economic perspective is looking at it from a financial and accounting perspective, which is whenever you have on your balance sheets or your income statements, or basically how you reconcile your accounts, that ad hoc payments like ECAP or other emergency programs are going to pay for operating expenses. What you're doing is you're building into your accounting system and your financial structure within your business this expectation that you're going to be able to rely on payments like these for variable or operating expenses, which we know is not necessarily true. To kind of close out the episode, I will touch a little bit on some of the payment rates that we see for some less common commodities that we do still grow in Kansas, especially in our area of the state, and then covering a couple of what might be considered to be frequently asked questions about this program. So just looking at a couple other commodities that are covered by the ECAP that we grow in north central Kansas. Barley's payment rate is going to be at $21.67 per acre. Oats, or if we are growing spring oats for harvest for grain, that's going to be a payment rate of $77.66 per acre. And then just a couple more. Canola is going to be paid at a rate of $31.83 an acre, and sunflowers are going to be paid at $27.23 an acre. Like I mentioned, not a whole lot of acres in our area that are going to be eligible in those categories, but just a couple of payment rates to keep in mind. Something else that could be considered a positive if you are double cropping, acreage that has been reported with both an initial commodity and a double crop commodity, most likely in our area that would be double crop soybeans, will be eligible for payment on both plantings if an approved in an approved double cropping combination. Whenever it comes to double cropping wheat followed by soybeans, that's definitely going to be an approved double cropping combination. In fact, many times crop insurance agencies will reach out to me to sign a verification of common practice for approved double cropping combinations. So that's definitely going to be accepted. Likewise, if we're in a double cropping situation where we're starting with our winter wheat in a graze and grain environment where we're turning out cattle prior to hollow stem in wheat, and then we end up harvesting the wheat for grain and then planting soybeans afterward, both the wheat and the soybeans would still be eligible for payments at the payment rate of each commodity. On the opposite side of things, if we are in a situation where we had prevent plant acres, but then we turned around and planted to a different crop later on, so suppose that we had intended to get out in the fields April 1st and plant some corn, but then down the road we ended up having to do some late season milo because we just couldn't get into the fields until mid to late June. That's a situation where the payment would be limited to the milo stand that was planted. There would be no payment against the corn, even in a prevent plant capacity. So those are just a couple of caveats, things to keep in mind about what falls into the realm of eligibility for these payments. In closing, I just want to reiterate that whenever we have these ad hoc payments through the ECAP program or other forms of emergency payments that come down the pike from Congress or from our executive agencies, it's always nice to have a little bit in the bank to help pad our pockets a little bit, to just keep the farm operating at a higher level of liquidity and cash flow. But ultimately, as farmers, we're not in the business of raking in the government money. We're in the business of growing food and fiber for the world. And so if we're able to use tools like these to improve our capacity to do that, great. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're being the most profitable and productive farmers and ranchers that we can be. With that, this has been Gab in the Cab, and I'm Luke Byers. We will talk to you next time.